we need to address the elephant in the room, which is to say the second half of this concert. It is a brilliant and happy three-movement symphony ending with a jolly march, followed by a 20-minute encore after the applause dies down, which is to say the Tchaikovsky Sixth Symphony with that deceptive third movement march, which has fooled people for decades.
It sure has. There's only one reason that that's on the season. Number one, when I came to audition, when I had my very first week with the Pacific Symphony, prior to me being offered the position of music director, the program ended with Tchaikovsky's Pathétique Symphony. So this was my real first relationship with the Pacific Symphony, was formed with this work. And I should also say, in the summer of 1989, Leonard Bernstein conducted the Pathétique with the Boston Symphony on the famous Serge Koussevitzky Memorial Concert that he does every summer from Tanglewood. And so I was just completely emotionally filled with Bernstein-esque kinds of interpretation and just feelings about this symphony. So I did it in the fall in Ann Arbor. And then when I came here, I said, oh, I just have to do it with the Pacific Symphony. So that ended my very first program. And that's why it actually ended up. And since that time, the symphony and I, the Pacific Symphony and those great musicians, we've enjoyed performing this work on several occasions, and it never tires. Yeah. As you say, it's really an incredible work. You have to realize that before the Pathétique, which is the Sixth Symphony, Tchaikovsky had a couple of really bad outings, failures. One was an opera called Iolante, and another one was a little-known ballet called The Nutcracker. I mean, so as a composer, he didn't have much confidence in himself. And on the 19th of October, 1893, he was going to make the first rehearsals. And he wrote to his brother, I think this is going to be good. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course. This is good. I feel really proud of this. And on the 28th, there was a really big ovation for the symphony. He conducted it. 6 days later, the beloved Tchaikovsky has died. So this literally was the last symphony he conducted, the last notes that he heard of his. I mean, it does have a tragic story. And of course, that whole story and the mystery and the question remains in musicology. It's like, did he write his own eulogy? Is this his own epitaph? Did he know? Is this his requiem? You know, what is that march movement about? Is it really joyous or is it defiance?
And don't forget the limping waltz movement, or the injured waltz movement, however you want to call it.
Well, I do say it's injured, and I use the word fractured. I think it's fractured because it's in 5/4. I mean, and so, of course, the joy of the waltzes that we know and love from either the Nutcracker or Swan Lake, they're all in 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. This is kind of limping all the time, which says to me only that somehow or another, the joy of waltzing and dance in general has somehow or another lost some of its luster in him. And of course, we come to the very beautiful second theme of the first movement, which is so beautiful, but there's so many words around it and it's muted. And so some people make it very lighthearted and very loving, as though it's a love theme. I make it as a love theme as well, but I make it as love that he never had a chance to realize. So there's a certain pining and certain wanting and yearning for a passion that never really gets realized. And it's just one of the great symphonies of all composers.
Yeah, I mean, you think of someone like Gustav Mahler as being very autobiographical in his symphonies. I mean, there's always that, like the Sixth Symphony and all that, losing, family members and his own
Maria, yeah.
And even with something like Berlioz, going back to the Symphonie Fantastique and his obsession with Harriet Smithson and all that. But in between those two composers, you've got, I believe, one of the most autobiographical symphonies. I go with the theory that this is his life, and I do believe that he was writing his own requiem in that, because those final measures where the orchestra basically just dies away and it's nothing but low strings. I mean, how much more tragic can you get? I mean, the only complaint I have about the symphony is that it's pathétique instead of tragique. You know, I mean.
Well, and the word pathétique came later. That didn't come during Tchaikovsky's life. That was, but the last movement with this falling, dee, da, da, dee, da, da, dee, da, da, dee, da, da. It just falls every time. It just sinks. And what's interesting about it is that it starts the note da, 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 da. Sounds like a very simple descending line, but it starts D, that F sharp goes, it's in the second violins, and then the first violins, da, 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 da.
Really?
So it's, yes, and some people think, oh, that's because Tchaikovsky is thinking stereophonic. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry, in my opinion, my humble opinion, I'm not so sure that Tchaikovsky's thinking stereophonic effects in these moments of his life when he's basically knocked on the door of fate in defiance and is willing to accept this fate that I feel in this last movement. What I feel is that it would be too simple to go dee, da, 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 da. But if it wrangles and wrenches between two instrumental groups, it gets kind of twisted and torn. And as I use the word wrenched, dee, da, da, dee, da, da. And of course you hear, I mean, what I always tell the cellos, just have to play it as though this is the last crescendo you've ever written. This is the last diminuendo you ever heard. This is the last crescendo you ever heard. This is the last diminuendo. And then you hear those pizzicatos, the basses are divided. Boom, boom, boom. It's almost as though, and they get further and further apart with a rallentando at the end, a retardando. And you think, these are just, for me, there's only one explanation. These are just disappearing heartbeats.
Right, right.
And what really gives it away is one single note that comes before this coda. And it's in the chorale that the trombones and tuba plays. And it's the only note played by the tam-tam.
Huh.
And in Tchaikovsky's music, tam-tam, whether it's, regardless of where it is, a tam-tam is almost always, for me anyway, a death stroke. And it's the only note that instrument is heard of, and it just boom. And then you hear this trombone tuba chorale just before this bum, 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 just before this last codetta. It's a tremendous symphony. And if it's done right, you can't move or breathe at the end.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, so I just allow the silence to last as long as it possibly can before I release any tension and make an exhalation, allowing the audience to know that it's finished, because you really shouldn't know when it's finished. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the end of Holst's The Planets. You know, the ending is to be determined. It must be difficult conducting the end of the Tchaikovsky Pathétique and making sure the audience doesn't jump the gun. I mean, conductors have various ways of communicating with the people behind them to say, not yet, not yet, not yet. What's your secret? How do you?
For me, it's not really a secret. And of course, in this and other places, Mahler 9, other places, Bruckner 9, people can only applaud too soon. You know, if you're an audience member, you can wait as long as you want or applaud on your way home. It's better than breaking the silence with an applause too soon. And this is one of those moments. And the thing of it is that I don't think about the audience, and I don't think about trying to keep them from applauding. All I know is that if I'm anywhere other than with those cellos and basses inside the heart and soul of Tchaikovsky, then they're going to applaud whenever they want to, because the performance would not have demanded in its own right this kind of absolute lengthy silence and intensity in silence. And so I just try to be inside the music and not try to do anything with my hands or with I just try to keep the tension there in my body and not let that go, not allowing people to realize that the music has slipped away from us, as his brothers did at 3 a.m. in the morning on November 6th, you know, that the poor Tchaikovsky, our beloved Tchaikovsky, had slipped away.
Yeah. Yeah, at least with the Tchaikovsky Sixth, I mean, there is some sort of finality that is inherent in what's going on. It's not, I mean, the big surprise was the third movement ending, where it's just so big and so bold that, you know, traditionally people have mistakenly applauded since its premiere. And I mean, was it Beecham who once actually took a bow, walked off the stage, walked back on, bowed to the audience again, and then conducted the finale? Was it?
Yes, and I understand there might have been a performance by the New York Philharmonic somewhere in South America where they never played the finale.
Oh,
because there was just so much applause and so much.
Ouch.
But you know, I tell orchestras at the end that it's a victory march. But let's talk about what the victory actually was. He didn't really win anything. He overcame something. In other words, I make it a march of defying the idea that death lays in front of me or lies in front of me, and that I'm no longer afraid of you. So when it goes, bam, 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 I have my fist and a vengeful look in my face, not bam, 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 we won, yay, applause. No, and so if you kind of change the way you play it, so it sounds more aggravated and more aggressive than victorious, it somehow or another keeps an audience from applauding, especially, and here I do actually keep my hands up and I try to go into the last movement, and I tell the strings who come in at the beginning, I says, you should come into it tired. You shouldn't take a breather before. It should sound difficult. It should sound hard. It should sound labored. You know, it shouldn't sound fresh, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. You know, I also just realized it must be every single time you've conducted the Sibelius Fifth Symphony a nightmare with the final chords. I mean, for those who know the Sibelius Fifth, it just ends with these, is it 6 stabbing chords, the 6th? And it's not a plagal cadence. I mean, that first thing doesn't resolve, but it always fools audiences. I mean, because it ends with da 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 bum, bum, bum,
yeah,
bum.
But with a lot of space. But with a lot of
much
space.
longer spaces,
Yeah.
much longer. And I've always thought, you know, if I was in hell, I would be given a baton and told, you know, go conduct the Sibelius Fifth and keep the audience from applauding.
And you have to understand, this happens at the end of the 4th movement of Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. Just before dee da 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 da.
Right.
Bum, bum, bum. And I remember a performance that Bernstein did where he holds it so long. I mean, he gets so excited and then he cuts it off. And it's like, if you don't know that the symphony is over, you think, is it over? You think, wow, what a symphony. But it's in the wrong key. It's in the, you know, it's
right.
It's so.
Yeah. Are there other spots like that in the standard rep that you have to sort of be aware of deceiving the audience?
Well, I think the most important is the ending of Mahler's Ninth Symphony. And of course, that last movement is, you know, over 20 minutes, depending on your tempi. And the last few minutes of it, it's like a single thread or a gossamer of like an A flat in the violins, which keeps coming back. And with every try, there's less of sound and more of a disappearance. And it's almost as though, you know, presence is no more, sound is no more, Mahler himself is no more. And eventually you have to give in. It's acceptance, you know, with the viola cadence that comes. And I swear to you, Mahler's trying to hide it from God. You know, like, it's not really finished. I promise you, that's not I'm already working on the ninth and you know, Das Lied von der Erde. Yeah, it's right. Like, so it's not the Ninth Symphony, I promise you. And it didn't finish. The violas are still playing somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, for those who don't know, Mahler was very superstitious, and he was aware of that Beethoven only got in 9, and so on and so on, and so he was just convinced. And really, he actually, in some ways, tried to fool God by writing a Ninth Symphony called Das Lied von der Erde, the Song of the Earth, and the thought, oh, that'll fool God, and it didn't.
Well, Rich, I just want to say that this is a varied program. I mean, when you think of starting with the work of John Williams, Ravel, Cesson, a little French coupling, and then this absolute dramatic Tchaikovsky statement. And I should also say that after Dennis played both of those concertos, he also played the second half. Most concertmasters would say, I've done my job for the night. Yeah. I'll see you tomorrow night. But he wanted to play the Pathétique with his colleagues, with the Pacific Symphony. He goes, Carl, I really want to play this with you. And so I was really delighted that after intermission that he came back on stage, and he did that 3 nights in a row. So Dennis, thank you for that as well. And Rich, it's always great to be with you. I don't know what time, I'm not keeping time.
We're actually out of time, because now, just to recap here, in 15 minutes on KUSC.org and at KUSC 91.5 and related frequencies, the concert we have been discussing for the last 3/4 of an hour will be broadcast once again on KUSC, because it's the first half of the Pacific Symphony season being rebroadcast Sunday nights at 7. So it'll be the John Williams, these tributes for Stagey, the 2 pieces with Dennis Keem, and the Tchaikovsky Pathétique Symphony, Carl St.Clair directing. And Carl, we're going to do this again next Sunday, right? With
another phenomenal program with me and Chin as the guest conductor. And I just want to say to everybody, you know, we love you. We miss performing for you. We miss serving you with our music, and we can't wait to be back with you. Our musicians, go to our website, pacificsymphony.org, and see what our musicians are doing.
Yeah.
Dennis put together a fantastic concert master. They're concert masters from orchestras all across the country, and including Hawaii. And for instance, Barry Perkins joined in with the principal trumpet of the National Orchestra of Costa Rica, did a beautiful Piazzolla piece. We have a group of musicians in Long Beach who are doing block by block in Long Beach, you know, that are just wonderful. I watch them every day because it's how I'm surviving, not making music with my wonderful colleagues. So please join. And also last Thursday night, we put out virtually a performance that we did of Beethoven's Fifth from 2017. That stays up until the 12th of September. So it stays up 45 days. So there are all kinds of ways of staying in touch with us, and we're doing all that we can to stay in touch with you, our loved ones, our friends, and our Pacific Symphony family, and of course the audience and all of the great listeners at KUSC.
Well, again, Carl, thank you. Always a pleasure to see you, even if remotely. And thank you to the audience for joining us here, either on Facebook Live, carried on Facebook, or on Zoom. And the concert starts in just about 10 minutes or so. So tune to KUSC 91.5 or KUSC.org and listen to the concert there. Carl, we'll see you next Sunday.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Be safe. Wear a mask.